Hello, fellow armchair generals. This is Gamer 1745 here, and I've had Narvik on my mind for some time now. And I eventually thought I'd make a special episode, if you will, because this is not a game-playing episode. If you're looking for the next Hearts of Iron 3 episode, look somewhere else. It's either just come out or will be coming out soon. But I've been thinking about Narvik, and to some degree the Norwegian campaign, but more of a what-if situation. Now, little background. Winston Churchill, at the time of the Narvik campaign, is civilian head of the British Admiralty, and it's basically Secretary of the Navy in American terms. And he wants to, as the start of winter is coming, wants to mine some of the waterways here. That's the thing, because over here there's iron/steel production going on and can't make it to the coast in here in winter, or a good chunk of the year, maybe almost half the year or something. He wants to mine it up here, violating Norway's neutrality. The British government overrule him. They try to get covert approval from Norway, so that, that they'd only just protest but wouldn't do much. But they say no. And at this point in the war, the British and French governments are all real worried about what's going to be the German reaction if we do something. Another thing that Churchill wants to do is mine the Rhine River, but oh my God, the French are worried. What if the Germans retaliate and bomb us if we mine the river? What if they, were to attack us? Well, yeah, they're already at war. So yeah, there's some ridiculous things going on. Yeah, we can talk about violating a country's neutrality, whether you do or don't do. Basically, you can look at later experience in here. Do you violate Cambodia's neutrality when somebody else is already violating Cambodia's neutrality? If Cambodia kept the NVA or whatnot you want to call them from moving supplies and troops through Cambodia, then yeah, the U.S. should not violate the neutrality. But once they're coming through unopposed effectively by the Cambodian government, then Cambodia showed it can't effectively, and I don't mean a few spies, it can't effectively control its own borders. So yeah, you get to go into Cambodia, and that's just the way it is. And this is some of the unrealities of, shall we say, modern UN relations, in that they scream and shout and jump around. You're violating. Yeah, well, if you effectively controlled your own borders, then that would be a different thing, but you're not. Somalia is not an effective state, so anybody can do anything they want into Somalia, because there's pirates, or I don't know if there's too many recently, but pirates out here attacking ships and taking hostages and whatnot. So any nation on the planet of the Earth can decide, oh, well, we have a reason to do a raid here and violate or bomb here, or whatever they feel they want to do. Because if, say, a Dutch, I'm not just saying, come and party and let's just do something in Somalia. I'm saying, if the Dutch have a ship that's captured and they get to have any sort of military operations inside of Somalia that they want, because they think it's going to protect their shipping. It's just the reality of the situation. So Norway is being used to effectively support the German war machine, shipping vital iron ore, a war material, across Norway. So they're involved in a war effort. They are not a strong enough power to sit there and say, you better not touch us or we're going to be really mean to you and attack you. they're not powerful enough. And so, yes, you can violate their national sovereignty. Now, should you just start bombing Oslo because of that? No, but mining seems like a reasonable thing. Now, that's sort of some of the background. Now, then the Winter War breaks out, and at this point, Soviet Union is allied with Germany here. So, and that's what it appears to the world. We now know it was more of a temporary thing, and they were sort of uncomfortable allies and whatnot, but it's looking like there's maybe a totalitarian grab of the world, that they're going to divide up the world between Soviet Union, Nazi Germany, Fascist Italy, Imperial Japan, and whoever else that can grab up little territories and pieces of land. So Britain and France and people around the world but want to help out Finland, and so the only effective way, Britain, which some think it's ill-advised to waste effort trying to support the Finns, because Britain needs the support, want to move in troops, but definitely supplies. I hope you heard the question mark, and it varied from politician to politician. Some, political leaders want to, send in divisions into Finland. Others just want to send in arms and equipment. And both Norway and Sweden say no, they don't want this to happen. But the British and French are sort of like, well, we just may have to do this anyways. So that they're sort of getting ready to do all of this. But then when the Winter War stops, that is put on hold because the real reason for it is no longer happening. That's sort of the background. So Britain and France have been having these sort of preparations going on. Now, this is also happening before the, maybe I should have used an earlier map, but I want to be able to look at Narvik. This is before the beginning of Fall Gelb and the Lightning War across the Low Countries in France. So, and again, I don't know what I would have done if I was there at the time. That is a different thing. What the British plan is to do is partially to secure Narvik up here to cut off the flow of steel and other iron and whatnot. Now, part of it is also a sort of central Norwegian campaign. They want to secure Trondheim, and they want to land up here and land out, I think, here, and move in to secure this area here, sort of banking on some of this. Now, I don't know how accurate this map is. I know to some degree it was made by people living here. I recently, just before making this episode, went and did the sort of Google map and looked in here. And it certainly don't look like this. Now there's some hills there, but some of these mountains that are sort of drawn here that I would go that this is more mountainous. I mean, it's not necessarily living on the top of those things, but there are these ridges with good valleys in between them, and sort of lots of choke points, and also lots and lots of choke points because of the sea along here. At least that was my impression of it. Now, again, this is giving some of the background. So now, what happens is Germany is attacking Norway, including covert operations, ships in harbor sitting there with civilian ships with weapons hidden in the hulls, and troops in some cases, I believe. I didn't read all the details. It's sort of unimportant for this talk. This isn't a detailed analysis of the Norwegian campaign either by the British or the Germans, but it's more of the what if. So Germany is, you know, they're securing this up here because this is a vital interest, but the sort of main initial thrust is here. And so Britain thinks it can come in here with some French support and come in and reinforce the Norwegians and hold the Germans, creating another front. The French really like this because they really want to fight a war somewhere other than in France. That's a place they don't want to fight a war. They want to fight a war somewhere outside of France. You know, soldiers may have to die, but let's not have our country torn up. I understand the thought behind that. And of course, so they're wanting to come down here. Now this, again, like I want to specify, is before, you know, the Battle of France, and where basically to very much the French, but even to a lesser degree to the British, unrealistic things were happening, things that couldn't be true that were happening. The speed of the attack and the wars just couldn't be happening that fast. So this is affecting the British mindset, Churchill and others. So they put a bunch of effort into this. That the British, fortunately, basically get the great bulk of their troops away from all of the Norwegian campaign. But this whole showdown here is wasted effort. The Norwegians just have no ability. I mean, supposedly because I think it happened on April 7th. Thinks his first reports of German troops in Oslo is this isn't April 1st. Don't give me these April Fool's jokes kind of things. You know, it's just complete believing of the speed and the rapidity of the attack on all sides, and to some degree, I would say on the Germans as well. That is an important element, I would say, too. Okay, so this is a realistic what if in my mind here. So if you had taken all of the Allied effort in this part of Norway, as particularly relations to landings on shore, and put all of it into Narvik, I don't think there is any doubt that the Allies would have taken Narvik. Narvik, as it was a close-fought thing. Dietl, I would say, largely in the command element of it, is responsible for holding together the Germans, and in a sort of desperate situation are able to not just sort of hold out but push back against the Allies. But he would not have been able to do it because, like I say, it was desperate as is, had the Allies poured more effort into this. Now, if this is a reasonable proximity of its naval base here, and I don't know about this air base. I think this may have been something that was added by, I'm pretty sure these were added by an event building air bases in Norway. So this, I don't think was there. So, had the British put the same amount of effort that they put into Norway, same number of ships, same number of troops, same number of equipment, and put it into Narvik, I think it's clear that they would have won there. Then what? I think this is a critical thing. What would have happened then? Could the British have held? Well, if you use the term, well, if they put in enough, then yes. Well, yeah, okay. But what is enough, and do they have enough? Figuring in the initial stages, I think it's clear that they could have, because the Germans are focused on the Battle of France. And so all the panzer divisions are down here. All the motorized divisions are down here. The main paratroopers are well, at least a lot of them are jumping into the Netherlands. So, obviously there's still a few, till the end of the Battle of Narvik, there's still a few paratroopers up there. So there are, paratroopers all around, but this is the main focus. Yes. And if you hold Narvik, I think effectively, if you're the British, you hold all the rest of Norway, because the Finns at this point aren't going to allow Germans up here at this point maybe later. And the Swedes, aren't going to allow Germans coming through Sweden. And we're still talking about the British. They're going to have naval control up here. So there's no effective way of Germany coming up here. And so you hold Kirkenes and other places too by effectively holding Narvik. But post the French campaign, what would happen and what would the effects be? Well, why would the British even want to hold Narvik? Well, we've talked about the iron ore. Now, of course, that can still flow. Now, of course, Britain may decide to violate Swedish neutrality and secure this northern bit of Sweden on the sort of principle that maybe Sweden won't do too much about it if they're really nice and pleasant British people, serve everyone tea, and just try to occupy the mountain fastness here and leave all the rest of Sweden in peace. But we'll get to some of that in a moment. And this is maybe taking a bit longer than I intended, but I hope it's interesting. So it's to hold, the steel, which would be crippling to the German war economy. Not devastating, but crippling. There's a difference. It would limit the Germans' ability to produce steel objects. Tanks, trucks, aircraft engines, ships, maybe more importantly, submarines, rifles, because rifles need steel, particularly barrels, and machine gun barrels need high quality steel. And if you don't have enough to produce subs, you might be taking some of that steel away from rifles to produce subs. So this could cripple their war effort. But more importantly, having, or maybe as importantly, having a base up here, because you can build easily some improve it air bases as well as naval bases. It's going to continue to operate out from here. Again, this is a bit of a Mercator, pseudo-type Mercator map projection. Some of this is closer than it appears. I know you guys are aware of that, but it allows sea and air operations out into this part of the world and cut off more effectively German shipping, submarine type movements. Yes, of course, they get subs down here, but still it limits operations from this part of the world. So there's some good reasons to try to hold up here. And it creates another front, another anxiety to the Germans for counter-offensive operations, as we will be seeing in my upcoming continuing series. I think there's going to be some scripted invasions in Norway. I have yet to have any of those, but will be coming, and we will see how they go. But if you're already up here, it's not that hard to descend down and do flanking maneuvers, and if you're doing them well, you can also be withdrawing if need be. Now, so if there's a reasonable amount of British forces put here, with, even with the Battle of Britain, I think you could spare a few Hawker Hurricanes, or even like some Brewster Buffalo, the American fighters that the British were buying. Actually, they also helped get Finland get some of those. They did use the British did use those down like in the Burma campaign against the Japanese, as well as the P-40 Warhawks, the famous aircraft that the Flying Tigers, could zoom back over there again, used. That those aircraft that went to Chiang Kai-shek were British rejects. The British went, yeah, they're a little outdated, and we really don't want to put our troops in, our pilots into them. So no. thank you very much, because they had been produced sort of for the British, and I don't know quite the contract, whether it was, because the British did buy some, and had been using some. But had you put some, an aircraft is an aircraft, and I know the British at that point, at an early enough point, they are still on a sort of a cash and carry, so it's not just like more aircraft. Yes, please. No, it's what aircraft can we afford now, and do we have better options to spend our money on, whatever it may be. Because a P-40 fighter, you might not want to take it into a dogfight with a Messerschmitt or a Focke-Wulf. I'll grant you that. But, and of course pilots don't always have the choice, but you can put them up into the air and have them go after the incoming Ju-88s, the Heinkel 111s, while the Hawker Hurricanes and the Spitfires are dogfighting with the Focke-Wulfs and the Messerschmitts. That doesn't mean that there won't be a Messerschmitt getting on a P-40's tail and shooting one down, but it just means they're still useful in shooting, still an effective weapon at shooting an enemy aircraft out of the air. Whether it's the most effective aircraft, and if your primary bottleneck is pilots, training and putting pilots, and not aircraft, then of course you put your pilots in the most effective aircraft. But so the idea that you should be able to have some aircraft up here that can shoot down bombers. And some, Now, so what would Germany do if there's British control up here? Well, at some point they're going to try to march up through Norway. But I think that is not that practical. Again, looking at the map, and you can look at a 1940s map. Not that there isn't connection, but my understanding is it's similar to like Chile. Chile, I think now has a road along with the great bulk of it, but for the longest time it was a country only connected via the sea, and maybe more so than Norway. They were quite well developed areas of Chile, but since it had been developed by the Spanish, which were sort of the conquistadors and imperial power, they were mainly moving between areas along the sea, and there wasn't even any sort of practical land connections for the longest time. And again, I don't know, I don't think there at this time, 1940s, a rail connection between here to here, even in summer, when you can handle the terrain. So Germany has a very limited ability to push up into here. And now, an airbase is a flat piece of land that aircraft can take on and off from. You can build one of those pretty damn easy, pretty damn quickly. But to effectively operate an air campaign, you need to have fuel, lots of it. If you're just having some fighters, machine gun ammo, no problem. You can, the Germans get some coastal aircraft, even with the British Navy, land, a bunch of machine gun ammo, put them in aircraft. But bombs are big. Bombs are heavy. 1,000-pound bombs, 500-pound bombs, those are big. Loading them on a ship here in Kiel, that's easy. Unloading them near to Narvik Air Base, how do you get them off the ship? Well, of course, the ship, has a lot of the ships in the period, had a crane or two, and they can, pick them up in small pallets. But how many are you going to get off at a time? What's a, I'm presuming a fishing port or something like that. Small port somewhere in this area. So how many ships can you unload at a time? How quickly can you unload a ship? And then how quickly can you transfer the bombs from the ship to the airfield to then load on it? So I think a German air campaign would be very limited up here. Again, yeah, they can have an airfield, and they can have some bombers, and they can put some bombs on some aircrafts, and they can go drop them in the Narvik region. Now, of course, if you're just dropping a few bombs at a time, and you can hit some ships in here, oh, those are valuable things, and you can blow, sink them, and that, whether they're warships or transports. Well, the British are pretty good, and if the British sort of hang out here, with a lot of supporting ships, put up a lot of flak, and then just sort of at night or something run in a few, transports into Narvik to keep the campaign alive here, and you have a reasonable amount of air cover so that, yes, you get bombed, but it's not huge and overwhelming. I think you can hold. So what would the Germans do? Well, we can, with this kind of, we can look at some historical things. The Germans occupied the Channel Islands almost by accident. I think they flew over and thought that it wasn't very well occupied, and then sort of landed and found out that it had been evacuated. The military had evacuated and then sort of occupied it. But the British decided they weren't going to fight for it. Even one island, I think one of these out here, was completely all people were evacuated from it. Too many in some of these other areas to get them out in time, so they evacuated what they could, and all of the sort of military type forces, they got those out. So Germany did occupy that. They didn't even try for Gibraltar. They were planning Malta, but partially, dealing with the Italians, they didn't put too much effort into that. Remkes, Fallschirmjägers were getting ready for that, but the various reasons it got called off. Crete, that was a significant airborne effort with a naval invasion backup. I think it's maybe a little closer than what this map sort of shows, but obviously there are a few more islands in here. And this was a close run thing for the Germans. Had the British really pushed back, they could have pushed the German invasion off. I mean, just with the forces and capabilities on the island at the time. They just got overwhelmed and thought they were losing and weren't. At worst, from the British viewpoint, it was a stalemate. At best, the British were actually winning, but they thought they were losing, so they started a sort of withdrawal plan, and the Germans reinforced. Now, once the Germans reinforced, then the Germans were winning. So we can see what they did there. Trying to look at other sort of little isolated things. Yeah, not too many other things. So we see a really hard push on Bulgaria to allow Germans through Bulgaria to get at Greece once they're coming in. So would the Germans... So I think Britain could have, with air and naval power, kept any serious landings from happening. I think a defense in depth that could have bled any attacking force white was quite possible because of the logistic headaches of trying to supply land forces as well as sort of coastal forces. Trying to supply would be very limited. Would the Germans have attacked through Sweden? Maybe, and that's an interesting thing. Or would they have just allowed it to exist? If they had attacked through Sweden, there would have been a collaborationist element in Sweden. I've not looked at it deeply, but there were various Nazi parties in Sweden. Again, I haven't looked at that. Just I have some very good links to some stuff, and someday I'm going to, but I want to do it well and right and in depth. So I just really have sort of ignored Sweden from that perspective. Just completely ignored it, just because either I'm going to do it right or I'm not going to bother with it. This is just sort of my personality. I don't know whether, as a percent of the population, how big of a movement that would have been on occupation. And do remember there are, shall we say, two types of Nazis, if you will. Maybe you could even throw in the fascists outside of Germany. You have people like Quisling. I think he was a Nazi. He was definitely a fascist. I just don't know a lot about, and I've come to a new understanding of what Nazis or National Socialism is. National Socialism is not fascism. I used to believe National Socialism was fascism plus rabid anti-Semitism. It is not even fascism. The more I've looked into the economic situation, it is less fascistic economically than fascism ideologically. Sometimes you have situations in countries that the ideology and the reality on the ground don't match, and that can even include the Soviet Union under Stalin, in that they were never really a communist society. They never really achieved that communist ideal or something. So you have the practical versus the ideal. National Socialism, as I'm really sort of coming to understand it, doesn't have a strong fascistic economic system in it. Fascism can be sort of popularly used as any sort of authoritarian government or movement, or you can have fascism as in the ideology. I'm talking about fascism as in ideology. Then you have National Socialism, and now a lot of people in Germany, including National Socialist Party members, Nazi members, may have been more fascists and thought Nazism was fascism, because Nazism sort of masqueraded as fascism, if you will. I don't know on Quisling. And there are definite, in the Nordic countries, for various reasons, there's the use of the swastika. And I'm talking there is in Finland, but as a political party symbol. So they often describe themselves as National Socialists as opposed to fascist. Some of what is a good descriptor of this is in Switzerland, in which you have the National Front is clearly a National Socialist movement, and you have the Front National, which is clearly a fascist movement. The Front National is in the French-speaking areas. The National Front is in the German-speaking areas. One is fascist and one is National Socialist. Their economic policies are notwithstanding of these two various parties, but the National Front wants a union with Germany and its Volksgemeinschaft, wants Germanic unity. See, that's a strong element. Now you can notice also, and what is extremely important, and what is often confused, between nationalism and Volksgemeinschaft. Now, to Hitler and the upper leading elements of the Nazis, nationalism and Volksgemeinschaft are inseparable, but nationalism is not necessarily based on the nation of Germany. It's on the Volk, the Volksgemeinschaft, the racial identity. Political boundaries such as Austria and Germany are meaningless, and if you are an Aryan and you very much belong in the same Volksgemeinschaft, and much of the thinkers think basically all of the the Danes, Norwegians, Swedes are all part of these I would say almost to the point, equally Aryan viewpoint, and so they all belong in the same nation. Now, Quisling was a rabid Norwegian nationalist, and he very much fought for, and I know we're getting a little far astray here, sorry about this, getting longer than I intended, very much was promoting a strong Norwegian movement as part of a greater National Socialist world. Also in there was the SS movement, which the Germans supported in there. Terboven, the main German head German politically in Norway, didn't like they didn't like each other. Did not like Quisling, and it's sort of interesting that the main primary political German leader hates the main primary Norwegian collaborationist. That may be a mistake diplomatically, but it clearly shows you what National Socialism really was. It wasn't going to allow, in the long term, or even in the midterm, the idea of a Norway, and Quisling was taken in by this from before his betrayal of Norway to this whole thing. He was taken into this idea that this was not going to happen. It just wasn't going to happen in this even midterm, let alone long term. Midterm as in the next 5 to 10 years, Norway was going to disappear as a political entity. And so you have the local SS movements going on, and they're recruiting locally, and their whole outlook, which is, this is not necessarily under Terboven, but he's the main German leader. The SS are coming in here. They are in a pan-Aryanistic movement, and want to Germanify, which includes spreading the German language, but a mix of cultures up here. So there's this conflict. Now, and this is what's going in, I don't know what the Swedish Nazis, whether they were, and so those are the sort of two types. You have the idea that you're a National Socialist type person, and you are a nationalist for your non-German country, or you're a pan-Germanist. Then you might just simply get fascists, which don't have a hyper, and this is an element of National Socialism. It's a hyper-racial viewpoint would be a very good term. Not hyper anti-something. It can be, as in anti-Semitic, but it is just also hyper-racial. Not necessarily racist. I mean, they are racists, but it's racial. It's racial identity. That is what is different. If you look at fascism, they're not hypersensitive about race. Now that very conscious of maybe the difference between Europeans and Africans, but they're not overly conscious between races, as in the National Socialists, between Europeans. The National Socialists were conscious of races within Europe. And we get down to, are there different, I mean, we know there's different genetic backgrounds. And I'm not talking about Jews. I'm talking about the difference between Gauls, ancient Gauls, that are still, because the Franks that come in, which you could maybe, those are Germans. Yeah, but that's just a surface culture. I think the great genetic makeup of France is still the ancient Gauls. But a geneticist can continue to study. But are those really a different race? Now, Hitler thought so. Would you, and again, I don't have any expertise, and I don't know if we understand, the different genomes and whatnot, versus, I don't know, different tribes, different greater family groups, and yeah, you can always expand that out to a race, but to Nazis' racial identity. See, and so this National Socialism, as understood by the Nazis of Germany, is hyper-racial. Fascism isn't. They may very well, just because of the times, define, you know, Europeans, Africans, Asians, whatever. But they're not, you know, are you a Etruscan, ancient Etruscan, Tuscany, or are you a, you know, a Greek from, you know, down in Brindisi or whatever down here, you know, from a Greek settlement? You know, are you racially Greek or are you racially Etruscan? You know, kind of stuff. And that's never in anything going on in fascism. That is what is going on in National Socialism. So I don't know in Sweden whether the Nazi movements up here, and there were multiple and at the same time, whether they would have been overly collaborationist or overly nationalistic. But had Germany invaded Sweden, you are going to have to occupy it, and there's going to be some Swedes are not going to like it. I don't even know if that would have helped. Simply moving from this front to this front, even in summer, yeah, it adds another front to it, and another bombing bases. But I don't know if that would have helped. I think Britain still could have held up here, and could have been another off-continent, if you will, because in a way it's off-continent because of the Baltic Sea. Yeah, I know it's connected as part of Europe, but you know what I mean, because you can go the Mediterranean, and the Mediterranean world is the coast. Culturally, because of the Arab invasions, we have the north-south divide, but it used to not be as big a thing. So we might have had a long ongoing British mountain warfare type thing here, which then critically impacts the war in the East. And so this really could have a for a minimum amount of effort, it could have had a massive effect on the rest of the war. Would Finland have joined in the continuation war had the British even just been sitting up here? Because if you're holding up here, you're probably, because there was a rail, the Germans were allowed to ship troops across Sweden, but I don't believe there's any real rail. Well, there is rail links up here, I know. I think. I don't even know if there's rail links here. I think maybe the Pestamo mines were coming out via this way and shipping it. So you would have cut off all of this nickel and hyper stuff if the Finns went neutral, and if they didn't, and the British were sitting up here, they might very well have been able to secure that. So this could have been a very critical element of crippling Germany, and I think maybe shows that Churchill was right. Now his execution, because of his expectations of being able to sort of fight in this part, doing sort of what I'm saying about doing, but doing it down here instead of up here, didn't work out. And by the time reaction to things, it was too late. But I think it very well could have worked out. Now, I'd really love to hear your thoughts. I know Django, we've been talking, he's been reading a lot about Barbarossa, talking about things like that. And a few others of you, we've been talking about these different subjects. Would really love your impressions of, do you think the British could have held out against German operations just from Norway? Would the Germans have invaded Sweden just to get at the front? If so, could the British have still held out? Really like to know your thoughts, but this is sort of my sort of special Narvik talk, because I've been thinking about it and decided I would share it as a historical talk. Sort of a what-if decisions. And very interesting. So, love to hear from you. Thanks for watching. Thanks for liking the videos if you would. And of course, please post questions, comments, suggestions, ideas. Love hearing from you. See you next time for more Hearts of Iron.